In this tutorial in CyberLink PowerDirector, we're going to take a first look at applying dynamic range compression to an audio track in your production. What in the world is dynamic range anyway, and why should you care about it? Dynamic range is basically the difference in the intensity of the sound. The difference in the human voice between a whisper and a shout. Those differences can cause problems and issues in making the production what you want it to be. Dynamic range compression allows you to reduce the difference in those intensity levels, or in some cases, expand them. We're going to show you how to do that. Now, we're working with PowerDirector version 17 or 365. Dynamic range compression in version 16 was a simple slider. It's much more robust and complex in version 17 or 365. I'm looking at a clip here and it has some sounds. As you listen to it, you will hear some chanting and then you'll hear a whistle. Now you notice that audio is rather distracting. What would happen if we could reduce it besides simply lowering the gain of a segment of the audio track? This is a much more sophisticated approach. Let's see what we can do. I'm going to click in PowerDirector 365 on my track and then right click and choose Edit Audio and then choose my audio editor. And here I begin to see the waveform that I'm dealing with. When I look at this, I see the chanting in these repeated areas on the left side. I also have that spike in the middle, which happens to be the whistle. Now, instead of simply lowering the gain in those segments, we're going to apply dynamic range compression. How do you begin to do that? Let me give you two ways to approach that task, by the way. The first way is simply click on dynamic range compression on the left side under volume. And if you don't see it, all you have to do is change the volume, click on the right triangle, and you'll see your dynamic range compression there. Or I can apply it to less than the entire clip. I can click with the left mouse button anywhere. That will move my time indicator. And then I can drag on either side with the triangle made of orange and select a segment, and then when I click on dynamic range compression, it will apply the changes only to that segment of the video. So you can edit as many segments as you want to in an entire audio clip. What we're going to do now is actually get into the tool. So with my cursor virtually anywhere in the clip, I'm going to click on dynamic range compression, and I have the screen pop up that shows me all my tools. It looks pretty complicated, and it is, but let me try to simplify it a little bit. What you have in the upper left corner is output gain. Why is that there? When you compress the difference in intensity between sounds, you will decrease the audio volume. And so what you can do is, therefore, use the output gain to compensate for that, make up for it by increasing the decibel level. Then below that, you have three different types of actions you can take. You have a limiter tool, a compressor tool, and a gate or expander tool. Now, they all have the same four sliders, but they work in slightly different ways. What does a limiter do? As the name implies, that reduces the difference in intensity of sounds, but it focuses aggressively on high-level sounds. That's what the limiter is focused on. So if you have high-level sounds, you'll see you can use that. Most people simply stick with the middle box, which is the compressor, which deals with medium-level signals. And we have the same four sliders. The one that I'm not sure how I would use very often is the gate or expander on the right side, which uses the same tools, basically not to reduce the difference between intensity signals, but to magnify it. So if you ever need to magnify that difference, you would use the gate or expander. In this initial lesson, we're going to focus simply on getting started by using the most common of the three, the compressor tool, And we'll use only the first two sliders, threshold and ratio. What do those two mean? Well, I'm going to move my working toolbox here over to the lower left and look at threshold. You notice the default is 0 and it goes all the way to a -120. Now, if you leave it at 0 decibels, you can change all the other sliders all you want and nothing will happen. Because if you look on the right side at the decibel level of the waveform, 0 is way at the top and way at the bottom. So you'd have to have a signal that's actually 0 decibels for this to be applied, and obviously we don't. So we're going to have to move the slider to the left. For me, it's counterintuitive, but what happens is when you move toward the middle of the waveform, you're moving to infinity, if you notice on the slider. So infinity means I'm at the very center of the waveform. The higher the numbers, the closer to what I would call the center of the sound you are. So I can move the slider, or I can drag over the numbers, or I can use the up or the down arrow keys to move it precisely where I want. I'm going to move it to the left, and I'm going to look at my waveform here. I have some signals like the whistle here, which is all the way up to a -3, and I have a -6 here, a -12. Most of my signals are greater than 18 and less than infinity. So I have to measure somewhere between 18 and infinity. Let's guess somewhere around, maybe 20, mid-20s, upper 20s. So that will be my threshold. The threshold is the level at which the compressor will start to act on signals. It will leave everything else untouched. What do I want it to do? Well, that's what the ratio is for. That's the ratio at which the exceeding output is reduced. So we want to shorten or tighten the distance between the various intensities in the signal. Again, if I leave it to 1:1, there is no change. I can go up to 30. Let's go about 15 in the middle. And then we have at the bottom, if we want to preview, we can preview the applied result or the original result and click on the preview button. I find it's hard for me to detect the difference between the two, but I can detect it when I click apply and watch what happens to the waveform. So right now we're setting about around 23 decibels as the place where the compression begins, and we want to set it at about 15 to 1 in terms of the level, the ratio of the compression. I'm going to click on apply and watch what happens when we get to see our audio waveform. Nice. The differences are still there, but they're less acute than they were before. So if I play this, okay, you still hear everything. You hear the difference between everything, but it's not quite as intense as it was before. When you're done, you can simply click on the X in the upper right corner, which is just off my recording screen because I can't resize this perfectly. And I have two options. I can save the changes by clicking yes, or I can discard them by clicking no. We'll save them in this case. And now I see my audio waveform is quite a bit different than it was prior to that. So that the intensity of some of the sounds is more similar to the other sounds, and that may enable me to do some more creative things with other things I want to put on this scene without having the sounds be a problem. So that's an introduction to the dynamic range compression in CyberLink PowerDirector 17 or 365.